Hi there. This is a video about laws of exponents, specifically the power rules. Now, there are three different power rules that we're going to talk about today, but let's first just talk about the normal power rule, okay? And so what I first want to do is do this. I want to take the number 2 to the third power, and I want to then raise that to another number, and I'm going to raise that to the fourth power. So what I want to do is first look to expand this out. If I have 2 to the third raised to the fourth, what does that look like? Well, what that looks like is that I've got 2 to the third times itself 4 times. All right, so 2 to the third times 2 to the third times 2 to the third times 2 to the third. Now, what we know from our from using the product rule, we would add our exponents. All right, so the next, we're using multiple rules here, but we could write that as 2 to the 3 plus 3 plus 3 plus 3 power, which would eventually get us to the answer of 2 to the 12th power. All right. So the question is how do you use the numbers 3 and 4 to get 12? And the answer is that you multiply, okay? So let's extend this to something with variables. Let's look at an example where we've got, say, x to the 5th, and then we're going to raise that to the 7th power. Now, instead of writing this out a bunch of times, let's try just multiplying our exponents. And that's going to give us x to the 5 times 7 power, which gets us x to the 35th power, and that's our answer, okay? So when you have a power to a power, all right, the power rule, or an exponent raised to another exponent, you multiply your exponents. So your rule that we have for this is that if you've got some number a to the m and you raise that to the nth power, then you multiply your exponents and you write that as a to the m times n power. All right? All right, the next rule that I want to talk about is power of a product. All right, so let's say here, let's talk about product. Product, remember that word means multiply. Okay, so let's say that you've got the number, let's do 3 times x, and let's square that, all right? Now, there is a trick to this, but let's expand this out and rearrange things so that we can arrive at a rule. But if I'm squaring something, remember that what we're doing, we're taking 3 times x and we're multiplying it by itself twice. So 3x multiplying it by itself twice. Now, when we multiply things, we can reorder them. All right, I'm going to put my 3's together and write that as 3 times 3 times x times x. And so what we end up getting from this is we can write 3 times 3 as 3 squared, and then we can write x times x as x squared. All right, so you're taking, each of these numbers inside of your parentheses, and you're squaring each of them. All right, so the end result here would end up being 9 then x squared, okay? Let's look at another example, all right? Let's think of, say, 2xy raised to the third power, all right? So let's expand that out, and let's say that this is 2 times x times y times 2 times x times y times 2 times x times y. All right, and you're multiplying 2xy by itself 3 times. So 1, 2, and then 3. Now let's put our numbers together. So let's put 2 times 2 times 2 times x times x times x times y times y times y. All right, so now how many times are you multiplying each of these? Now you're multiplying them 3 times, so I'm going to write this as 2 cubed times x cubed times y cubed. All right, and we can evaluate 2 to the third power as 8. All right, so 8 times x cubed times y cubed is what we can do. So the question is is from both of these examples, all right, what could we do here? What are we doing? So whenever you're multiplying something on the inside of the parentheses and you're raising that quantity to a power, all right, you just take each individual part and raise it to that power. So you end up getting a rule here, all right? So the rule is, all right, let's say that you've got some number a times some number b, and you raise that to the nth power, all right? Then what we do then from there is we then write that as a to the nth times b to the nth, all right? And that's the power of a product rule, all right? We've got one more rule, power of a quotient. So power of a quotient, and quotient, remember that word means to divide. All right, so let's say that you had this. Let's say you had 2/3, that fraction, okay, we're dividing 2 by 3, that's what it means by the quotient. And let's say that we're raising that to the 4th power, okay? So let's expand this out, all right? And let's write this as 2/3 times 2/3 times 2/3 times 2/3. All right, so when we are multiplying fractions together, remember that you want to just multiply your numerators and multiply your denominators. So my next step down, I'm going to write this then as 2 times 2 times 2 times 2 all over 3 times 3 times 3 times 3. Okay, now that we're multiplying 2 by itself 4 times, in the top, all right, I can write that as 2 to the 4th power. If we're multiplying 3 by itself 4 times in our denominator, we can write that as 3 to the 4th power. All right, now that's the idea here, is to arrive at this. Now you can evaluate that. 2 to the 4th gives you 16, 3 to the 4th gives you 81. All right, so you can evaluate that. But what you should notice here is that to go from this step to here, you simply just have to raise both your numerator and your denominator to the same power, okay? So let's try this with some variables. Let's say that you have x over y, raising that to the 3rd power. Well, you know, we can write this as x over y times x over y times x over y. We can write this then as x times x times x in our numerator, divided by y times y times y. And then you got to realize that you're writing this as x to the 3rd over y to the 3rd, okay? And that you're taking whatever your quotient is and you're raising that to the same power. So your numerator to the 3rd power, your denominator to the 3rd power, and that's your answer. So let's write out a rule. All right, and so your rule here is that, let's say you've got some number a divided by some number b, and you're raising that to the nth power, then you're simply just going to write a to the m divided by b to the m, all right? And that's your rule, okay? Now, let's take a look at using these rules together, okay? So let's look at one more example on using these together and, doing something like that. All right, so on this, all right, what we're being asked to do is to simplify this, okay? And there's a number of ways on how to do this, but what I'm going to do is just, work from the inside out, okay? So as long as you're using the rules correctly, it doesn't really matter how you do this. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to work from the inside out. I'm going to take 2x and square that. Now, because I have a product here, 2 times x, I'm going to take both of those and square those. So my next step down, I'm going to write 2 squared times x squared in my numerator, divided by y, and then raise that to the 3rd power. Okay? Now, I can take 2 squared and write that as 4, and then times x squared over y, and then raise that to the 3rd power. Now, what happens here on this step is we're doing the same thing, okay? I'm going to raise my numerator to the third power and my denominator to the third power. And I'm going to write this as 4 times x squared, that's to the third power, and then over y to the third power. So the first couple steps that I've done, let's just recap here. Here was my first thing. All right, I did power of a product rule. Okay, I simplified that, 2 squared to get 4, and then I did the power of a quotient rule here. All right, so now I'm going to do power of a product again, but I'm also going to do power to a power. So at this next step, I can now take 4 to the third power times x squared, raise that to the third power over y cubed. All right, so 4 cubed, 4 times 4 times 4, 4 times 4 is 16 times 4 again is 64, times x to the 2 times 3. When I've got a power to a power, I multiply. 2 times 3, and then that's over y cubed. All right, so then from here, I'm going to write that as 64x to the 6th divided by y cubed. All right, and that's the idea of using your rules together. All right, so that's an example of putting all of this stuff together, because oftentimes, you know, on a lot of my videos, I just kind of show you the rule, but I haven't been showing you, you know, how to use the rules together. And you could do this a number of ways. All right, so I encourage you to try doing this maybe a couple different ways and seeing if you arrive at the same answer in the end. So hope you enjoyed this video, and we'll talk to you soon. Thanks a lot. Bye.